Sam, I wanted to ask you about that because you mentioned this, some of the reporting you did in Ayacucho, especially speaking with the families and looking at the violence that occurred there. Take us through a little bit about that and the complexities of finding the families, of getting them to talk. I mean, this was to explain as well that Ayacucho was the scene of the second worst single day in December, which was the first really big bad one, when around a dozen people were killed in clashes between protesters and police and military around an airport in the city. Tell us about the reporting you did there and the challenge in talking to people, getting them to trust you and share things with you.
Yeah, I mean, we showed up more than a month after the large protests that you mentioned, you know, when 10 people died in basically one day on December 10th, believe. And what was so striking to me was, you know, even a month and a half later, they were still so traumatized. And what we wanted to try to capture was, you know, in this place that was the epicenter of the conflict, you know, 40 years ago, kind of how all of those wounds are being reopened through this, and for the families who were, you know, the families of the victims. And we spoke, you know, it basically started off for me as just an interview with the woman who I'd heard was the kind of one of the family members organizing the other relatives of the victims to try to demand justice, to try to get attention. You know, when at this point, attention had kind of turned to other parts of the country. Ayacucho had quieted down, but these families still hadn't gotten answers. They still hadn't, you know, felt that the authorities were investigating these deaths properly. And this woman starts talking to me about her husband who died. And in this conversation, she also tells me that, you know, a week after, basically when her husband was shot, she ended up donating blood. She didn't tell anyone at the time that she was pregnant. And a week after her husband died, she lost 2 unborn twins that, you know, she hadn't told anyone about that at that point. You know, she'd shared some of her story about her husband, but she just started kind of opening up to me. And I was like, so caught off guard by the you know, the heaviness of her story and the just absolute like tragedy that it was, and how in the middle of all of that, she was picking herself up and organizing other families and helping them get to, you know, group therapy, and, you know, both working through that grief and that trauma, but also trying to demand action. And, you know, it to me was so clear also how she was dealing with, you know, in the middle of all of that, a lot of threats against her life, people accusing her of being a terrorist, of, you know, being associated with terrorist groups, which is, you know, a narrative that was being shared at the highest levels of government. And that I think was really re-traumatizing for people in Ayacucho, because that was always kind of the, you know, the scarlet letter on them during the conflict. And to this day, it was really a stronghold of the shining path of Jaime Guzman. And, you know, so they can't get rid of that past. And still today, even this woman who is, you know, a family member of a victim is still being told that she's a terrorist, and had people show up at her house and harass her. And so when she was talking to me, it was clear, you know, that first day she opened up and she was comfortable talking about it. And we had planned to spend the whole weekend with her and, you know, follow her around the next day. And she just, the next day she stopped responding to my messages. She seemed really exhausted. She had a lot on her plate. She was, you know, meeting with human rights researchers who were asking, so many people were asking so much of her, and it became clear that this was just adding more to her plate. And so we had to kind of know when to step back and to stop making it even harder on her. And so, you know, something that we, a lot of times in journalism, I think we expect we're going to get this much, and you get this much with somebody, and it's okay. You know, we made the most of what we got with her, and we were able to, you know, kind of stay in touch over the phone. And I think her story, even the little bit of it that I got, you know, kind of captured the level of grief that these people were dealing with long after the initial, you know, aftermath of the protest.
Thank you, Sam.